Welcome. My name is Courtney Clark, and I serve as the program director for Everywhere She Maps, which is a program within the Youth Mappers Network. And I'm joined today by my colleague, Maliha, and we'll be walking you through some of our best practices and tips for acing your job and internship interviews. So with that, I'll pass things over to Maliha.
Hello, everyone. This is Maliha Binte Mohiuddin, and I'm serving as a Everywhere She Maps regional ambassador, and I'm also a PhD student in WVU, and I'm doing my PhD in geography. And I'm very excited for this session, and thank you so much, Courtney ma'am, for helping me out. And this session is about how we can do well during the interview. And this is the last session of Everywhere She Maps professional development workshop for this summer session. And definitely there will be lots of sessions for the fall. So, and now I'm going to discuss about the research and reflect during the interview. So at first, I think it's very important for us to assess our strength. And now there is a question that has been asked that, what do you think, what's your strength? And that can be divided into three categories. One is the knowledge-based, another one is the transferable skills, and third one is the personal traits. So if we are discussing about the knowledge-based skills, in where you can talk about your education background, the experience that you have, your computer skills, or you know how to speak in Spanish, French, rather than English, and the degree, the training, and the technical ability that you have for your degree, for your major related with this. And also there's another thing that's really important. The second one is the communication and people's skills, and how you can solve any kind of critical problem solving or planning. This is also a very important part that you can bring up into your interview while they are going to ask you about your strength. And the third one is that definitely your unique qualities, that you're friendly and you're someone who loves to work in a team, and you can be a good leader or team player during any kind of work. And definitely from there, after assessing through your perspective, you can choose 5 to 7 strengths, and definitely that has to be matched with the specific job that you're applying for. And the whole thing is going to be really going to give you a perspective or a scenario that demonstrates that your strength during the interview. So on the next slide, I think, ma'am, it would be great that if you are discussing about this part.
Great. Yeah, thank you, Maliha. So I just wanted to lead you all through a little bit of a deeper dive into some strategies for thinking about your strengths. I know that probably many of us are quite humble and value teamwork and the contributions of others, but keep in mind that the job search process and especially your interviews are a time to really promote yourself. Put some of that humility to the side and make sure you're being proud of and sharing all of your accomplishments and your great skills. So if it's kind of difficult for you to do this, maybe reflect on some of these questions that I have here on the slide to get you started. So for example, how did you develop the skills that you currently have? What did you do in secondary school or university or even after that really made you who you are today? A lot of common skills that employers are looking for and will want to hear about include leadership, teamwork, communication, your ability to take initiative and work independently, as well as your problem-solving abilities. And so as you're trying to find examples to talk about in your interviews, make sure you're pulling from all of your vast wealth of experiences, not only internships and jobs, but also any fellowships that you've had, your Youth Mappers activities, sports you've participated in can be a great way to talk about leadership and teamwork, as well as clubs and other student organizations and activities. So if you're struggling to think about what some of your strengths might be and some examples, these are good places to start. You'll also want to make sure before you head into the interview that you're very, very familiar with the position description. Make sure that you are reviewing all of the requirements so that when you're asked, you have answers prepared. I know sometimes when we're in the middle of a job search process, we might be applying for, or if we're lucky, even interviewing for lots of jobs within a short period of time. So it's important to make sure you're reviewing and kind of keeping everything straight as you move from interview to interview. You'll also want to make sure that you're thinking explicitly and even writing down maybe which skills and experiences you have that directly match the position. And also think about skills or experiences you have that might be relevant or transferable, even if there's not a highly direct or obvious connection. So what I like to do when I'm preparing for an interview is actually copy and paste the position description from the website or the document that I have. I put it into a new document on my computer. You can also print it out. And I actually go line by line through all of the qualifications and the skills that are required. And I write down which of those skills I have, kind of my confidence or proficiency in each skill, and an example of how I've used that successfully in the past. An example of the second situation from my own past, where I had skills that were relevant, even if they weren't exactly what was listed in the description, was when I was applying for a job to be work in healthcare consulting. And in the position, I would have to be presenting to and interacting and speaking with hospital executives, primarily the CEOs and the CFOs of the hospitals. I had not worked in the private sector previously, so I didn't have direct experience working with these kind of individuals in an organization. However, I did have experience presenting on OpenStreetMap and Open Mapping to several heads of US government agencies. And so even though there was a difference in that I had presented to government officials and the job wanted to know about presenting to business officials, I still was able to make the connection that I had that experience public speaking and presenting to high-level decision makers. So that's just an example, and I'm sure you all have many from your own experiences as well. You'll also want to make sure that you are very familiar with the organization before you head into that interview. So I have here a list of some key topics you'll want to research, including information about their customers, beneficiaries, or stakeholders. And throughout this presentation, we'll talk about the term customer. We're using that in a very open and flexible sense. So it doesn't just have to mean someone who purchases a good or a service from a company. It can be anyone who is receiving or requesting work or a good or service from you. So seeing who benefits from their goods and services, reading content created by leaders of the organization. So that could be articles or blog posts or letters that they have. You'll want to also be checking for interviews that they've done with external media outlets and seeing what they talk about and focus on in those interviews. Make sure you check out recent press releases. This is a great way to know what probably people in the company are really excited about. Organizations tend to use press releases for their most exciting news, for innovations that they are coming out with. And so you'll want to take a look at those. You can even congratulate your interviewers on a recent success that you read about in a press release. You'll also want to make sure you're aware of competitor information. So especially if the organization is a company, know who the other players in that space are. If they're more of a nonprofit or an NGO, they may not have competitors, but you'll want to have a sense of who their partners are if they have particular sponsors or funding organizations that they report to, or just if they work closely with other organizations, you'll want to be aware of that as well. You'll also want to go ahead and see what you can find about the company's financial information. This availability of this information will really depend on the context. Here in the US, for example, companies that trade on the stock exchange, they're called public companies. They are required by the government to publish a certain amount of financial information for the public to see. So you could review that if it's available. Probably will be harder to find that data for private companies. And then also, depending on the context, nonprofits or NGOs might also have to publish some of their financial information. Those that are based in the US definitely have to do so because they receive certain tax benefits. So feel free to look into that. And then finally, also make sure that you're checking out annual reports, any project descriptions on their website, results or case studies to try and get a sense of that company's process, their approach to their work, and how you might fit in. So to find this information, of course, starting on the company website is a great place. Make sure though, you're not just limiting your search there. Go ahead and just look through what you can find on the company using search engines like Google. Take a look at their LinkedIn page and even some of their employees' LinkedIn pages. I would definitely recommend using Glassdoor. It's a fantastic resource and website. We'll put the link in the chat. If you haven't used it before, definitely make an account. This is a way that employees can post anonymous reviews of their employers, share salary information, so you can get a sense of what the pay might be for the position that you're interviewing for and ensure that you are being offered a fair salary compared to what you see on Glassdoor. And then also sometimes, depending on the organization, especially for larger ones, people who have gone through the interview process might even post interview questions that they were asked and leave some information about that interview. So Glassdoor is really, really great resource. Make sure you check out the company's social media, see how they're engaging online, and then make sure you check out other news outlets as well. Of course, the company in their own website and social media will be putting their best foot forward, but make sure you're aware of any negative press that they've been receiving. And then leverage your own network. So you may know someone or know someone who knows someone who works for that company or used to previously. See if they'd be willing to meet with you for even 15 minutes for a short informational interview and just to get their sense on whether the company is a place that you would like to work. And then finally, making sure that you really study the values of the company or the organization. So most will have these listed explicitly on their company website. But what I like to do as I'm doing my company research is kind of think about whether their stated values seem to actually align with their implicit or their lived values. And if I see a mismatch, that could be concerning. And it's something that I would want to learn more about. And then also making sure that the company's values align with your own values. Because at the end of the day, you'll be much happier, more productive, and more successful in a role if you're working for an organization whose values align with your own. Thank you, Dara, for sharing the link to Glassdoor in the chat. And also to all our participants, if you think of questions as we're going along, please feel free to put those in the chat. And we'll also have a Q&A at the end. So now we're going to talk about how you can actually prepare for specific interview questions. There are generally 3 types that you'll see in interviews. Of course, there can be more than this, but behavioral are very common and popular interview questions. These are focused on a specific situation that you likely have encountered in the past, and the interviewer wants to know how you responded. So here they're making the assumption that your past behavior and your past decision-making is a good indicator of your future behavior. The second type is situational or problem solving. Sometimes these are also called case questions. They're based more on hypothetical scenarios that you could encounter if you were to be offered and accept the position. So they're really testing your ability to think on your feet, problem solve quickly, work under pressure, and they want to get a sense of how you make decisions and how you think through problems. And then finally, you might be given different skill assessments or tests that would require you to complete a task that's related to the position requirements. So I want to focus primarily on behavioral interview questions today, because those are the most general and applicable to a lot of different interview situations. And one method that I've learned and found to be extremely useful as I prepare for interviews is called the STAR method. It's an acronym and it stands for situation, task, actions, and results. So if you're asked a behavioral interview question, you can kick things off by describing the situation that you or your team found yourselves in, explaining the task that you specifically had to undertake. So you'll want to focus on tasks that you were responsible for. Discuss whatever actions you took and why. So again, explaining your thought process is really valuable to interviewers. And then finally, of course, making sure that you kind of brag about and share the results that you achieved. And make sure you take credit for results that you specifically achieved. And so what you can do with this method is to research common behavioral interview questions. We list a few in this session. There are many, many more posted online, and prepare STAR stories is what they're called for each. So maybe even picking your top 10 behavioral interview questions that you think you could be asked about and making sure you have a STAR response for each of those. Again, you can also check out Glassdoor and see if there are common questions that are asked at the company you're interviewing for. And now Maliha will walk us through some examples of behavioral interview questions.
Yes, thank you so much, ma'am. Right now, I'm going to discuss about some of the interview questions, which is related with the behavior. And they can ask you about that. Give me an example of a time that you succeed the expectation. Then they can ask you that how you are going to deal with a frustrated customer in your past. And tell me about that, how you have done a multitasking to achieve several priorities. And they can also ask you about that there is a time that when you need to work like under the pressure and how you have done the work. So I can bring an example like when I was working as an intern with the Ministry of Disaster Management, there is some of the tasks that I have done under the pressure. And then when I have applied for the National NGO Program on Humanitarian Leadership, they have asked me the questions that, how you have done it. And on that moment, I just bring up the stories of my internship, because whenever you're saying those kinds of things on a story based, it also reflects your authenticity and the interest or the passion that you have for your work before. So, and then they have asked you about that, have you ever had a mistake and how did you handle it? So we're human being and there is no any ashamed to accept the mistake, but during the interview, how you can portray the things in a strategic and technical way, it's also very important. And also that they can ask you that, did you have ever made a decision that's not popular, and explain that how you have handled that situation. And then provide an example of a time when you had to do some, like you have to pursue someone to adapt your recommendation and how you have convinced them to do that. So those kinds of questions that during the interview they are going to ask, and they're going to, through this way, they're going to understand your personality and how it's going to fit for the job. So on the next slide, identify a weakness you can describe in an interview. So everyone has their own weakness, and during that interview time, you don't want to admit that, but there's some of the weakness that can be improved through the additional training. So suppose I am not so good in QGIS, but I'm improving through it, and I would like to improve that. So if any interview, if I'm going to face, and I'm going to say to them that, I am not so good in it, and I'm trying to improving my skills for QGIS. So it's something that, this is an experience, and this is the technique that can be improved through the training. So that's also a thing. And if this company is going to arrange any kind of QGIS training in future, definitely, if I'm going to recruit for this position, they are going to help me to get to the training so that I can get more skilled from it related with QGIS. And it is really important that, not to bring up those kinds of weakness, which is really harder for the interviewer to solve it for you. And especially like that, you can say about my communication skills or my ability to work in a team. So this is something like, for the interviewer, I think it would be really difficult for him or her to improve that situation. And the best way is to deal with that. The thing is that it's better not to bring up your personal weakness and to concentrate on the professional traits that you really wanted to improve. So this is a better way to deal with the weakness when they are going to ask you during the interview. Next slide, please. So what is your biggest strength and what is your biggest weakness? So there is an example that we are going to discuss about, in where there's that my strength is my flexibility to handle change. And as customer service manager at my last job, I was able to run around a negative working environment and develop a very supportive team by doing XYZ. I decreased turnover on my team by 20% within my first 6 months as manager. And as per my weakness, I felt that my cartography skills could be strong, and I'm consistently working to improve this. So whenever you are going to, they are going to throw you this kind of a question, it's always better to give it with the details, but it has to be very precise so that they can understand that what's your biggest strength and what's your biggest weakness and why is that for. So on the next slide, please. Tell me about a time that you had to deal with a frustrated customer. That the question that I have asked in before some of the slides, in where the example answer is that at my last job, a customer came in cursing and yelling the works. I know it was out of frustration, so I didn't take it personally, and I made sure the customer knew their concerns were being heard. I listened very carefully and apologized for that. She was complaining about an item she wanted to return. However, she didn't have her receipt. So I explained that I wasn't able to give her a cash refund without the receipt, but I could allow her to have the same amount in her store credit. So it ended up being a win and win situation for everyone. So this could be an example from your past experience, or any kind of job that you're doing right now and you're going to advance your career, or you wanted to apply somewhere else. You can bring those kinds of previous experience as an example for these kinds of questions too. Next slide, please. Show up to succeed. So how you can succeed in the interview. So in here, before and after interview. So at first, just map out the location and transportation the day before. If you're living in a city where it's very, very much traffic and everything, so it's better to leave the house 1 hour or 2 hours ago for the interview. And then write down what you like to ask to the interviewers, because at the end of the conversation or in between, the interviewer sometimes really asked us that, do you have any questions about it? And we felt that, I'm shy, I'm not going to say anything. But whenever you're going to ask the relevant questions to the interviewer, it's going to portray that you're very interested, thoughtful, and curious about it. And it's also, you need to remind yourself that you're also interviewing the organization. And then the third number is that the dress appropriately and the organization dress code. It's very important. Try not to be overdressed, and also definitely try to avoid the underdress thing too. And always arrive 10 minutes early. But if you're going to be late, you can really give a call to the office that you're going to arrive a bit late for the interview, and bring all the requested paperwork, be polite, and write a thank you email within 24 hours. So this is the thing that you really need to do before and after the interview. Next slide, please. During the interview, smile and show enthusiasm. This is very important. And make sure that you're making an eye contact and paying attention. So which is really showing the honesty and sincerity. I know that there are some people who have a problem with the eye contact, but I think that it's very important during the interview. But your eye contact has to be very smooth and you're really interested. But yeah, so it shouldn't look like weird, but yeah, that's what I wanted to say. And greet the interviewers by name and offer a handshake with them. And try to cultivate a relaxed attitude, because it's very important not to be stressed out, just a relaxed attitude, which is show that you can work under pressure, and as well as it's going to help the interviewer to relax too. And then ask questions when they give you the opportunity to ask. And close by indicating that you really want this job and ask for the next step. It also shows that you're very enthusiastic about getting the job to this position. And the next slide, please. Avoid the followings. Sometimes I think it's very better to read the questions, like the questions that you are thinking that, you know, they're going to ask me these questions, and how you're going to prepare that answer as a bullet point or anywhere else. You can do that, but never recite the answers, because it's going to reflect whenever you're going to give that answer to them. And arriving stressed. So it's just an interview. I'm just saying, but I'm also sometimes I got stressed out about some of the interview thing, but it's always like, don't be stressed out. And bringing bringing anyone else with you to the interview, don't do that. And don't bring any kind of food or drink. And bringing up the controversial subject related with politics and everything, please try to avoid that. And speaking in a negative about your previous job or boss, it's not going to help you for the future job that you are going to do. And being afraid to ask for clarification if you don't understand a question, please don't do that. Don't do that. Don't be confused or afraid to ask questions, because when I am right now in here and English is my second language, sometimes when I keep ordering something, actually I don't get it the way their pronunciation, and it's really natural for me. So I asked them that, could you please repeat it again? And they're kind enough to give me that, yeah, this is the thing what we are asking for. So go and ask the questions, and don't make any kind of excuse or lying. And it's better to not to give an answer with an yes or no. It's better always to give that answer with a bit details, but it has to be precise. And don't try to bring up your personal or family problem, because sometimes it doesn't reflect the professionalism in you. So try to avoid those kinds of following during the interview. Next slide, please. Okay, so do you have any questions? So I'm really going to transfer the whole thing to Courtney ma'am right now. Thank you, everyone.
Yes, thanks so much, Maliha. Really appreciate your awesome insights and your wisdom. So now we're going to open the floor up to questions. So feel free to put those in the chat or to unmute yourself and ask. And I'm going to mute myself for a minute and give you all some time to think about questions that you might have. Thanks.
Hi, Dare here. I'll ask a question that we had in the previous session, if that sounds good.
Perfect.
Okay, so there was a question about eye contact and how much eye contact you should give during the session. What would be the recommendation on that?
Yes, great question. Thank you, Dara. And actually, I will pull from the answer that you gave in the previous session. So eye contact, it's one of those tricky elements of an interview. There's no kind of black and white answer about exactly how much eye contact you should be providing. This will partially depend on the culture and the context where you're interviewing. So for example, I'm from the US. Eye contact is highly valued here. It's a sign of your confidence and that you are paying attention and engaged when you're speaking with someone else. However, I've also lived in Guinea and West Africa, where someone who's more junior or younger typically would not make eye contact with someone who is more senior than them because it would be considered rude to do so. Of course, depends somewhat on the situation, but that was generally a different cultural practice than my own. So make sure you're first aware of the cultural norm where you're interviewing when it comes to eye contact. And then second, keep in mind that eye contact is just one of several nonverbal ways you can express your confidence and also that you're engaged in the conversation. You'll also want to be paying attention to your posture. So make sure you're sitting up straight and not slouching. This also applies to video interviews where it's still easy to see if you're slouching or not. Your tone of voice and the way that you speak can also portray your confidence. So kind of all around, those nonverbals are really important to pay attention to. Thanks, Sarah.
Thanks, Courtney. Okay, if there aren't questions from the crowd, I'll also ask another question that we had in the previous session that Maliha, you gave an excellent explanation on, and that was discussing your weaknesses. So how to appropriately bring up your weaknesses. I think previously you gave an example about focusing not on behavior, but focusing on like your skills. And I think yeah. So if you could expand on just talking about your weaknesses, that would be really helpful.
Dara, if you don't mind, could you please, like, we were discussing it on the breakout session?
No, you brought it up in the main session about QGIS and how you would learn more about QGIS.
Yeah, sure. So yes, the thing is that when I was applying, like, I think it's not about that. Yeah, when I was applying for the GIS, like a GIS kind of a thing, like as an intern when my internship time. So on that moment, I have seen that actually I'm not so expert in it, and I didn't have an advanced course or like training related with QGIS. So, and on that moment, I felt that, I'm not good at it, but, and I went to the interview and I shared the thing that, I'm not good at it actually, but I'm improving that. So on that moment, actually, I didn't get that internship. And after that, I felt that I really need to focus. I really need to be good in GIS. So I started learning from that. So after this degree, I don't know when my PhD is going to be over, but degree, if I'm going to get into the GIS sector, I think I am preparing myself because I didn't get my internship, but for that reason, but yeah, it's definitely, I was upset. But the thing is that I learned that which part I really need to improve. So it's always better to speak up the weakness, because if you are saying that, yeah, like they're going to tell you that, do you know the cartography and everything, and you will be like very confident and overconfident, or you really need this job, and you will say, yes, I can do anything. And then when they're going to ask you those kinds of questions in a depth way, and you don't know the answer, and that's completely going to create a negative impact on your position that you're applying for. So it's better to speak up with like the weaknesses, but be strategic and technical. And if you don't get that job, you can try for some of the similar job, like after taking some time improving these skills. So yeah, through this way, I think it's never a shame to say your weakness, but you need to be very professional, sound very professional and strategic while discussing about it. I hope, Tara, I have given you the answer that you expected me to give.
Yes, that was great. Thank you so much, Maliha.
Welcome.
Wonderful. Well, if there are no more questions from the crowd, I would encourage you to view the recordings from our previous sessions in this series. Throughout July, we talked about how to boost your resume, write memorable cover letters, communicate professionally, and build your LinkedIn presence. And all of these can be found on the Youth Mappers YouTube page. And there's a link here. We'll also be sending out these slides and the recording in follow-up. And then finally, would just love to ask you to complete our brief evaluation form for the session. We really love and value your feedback, and it should only take you a few moments. Once you receive these slides, you'll also see at the end, we have a list of additional common interview questions and the sources that we used, and additional resources and articles that you can reference as you prepare for interviews. So thank you so much, everyone. We hope you have a wonderful rest of your day, and good luck with your job search.